It's kind of dark still. Why is it still dark? Oh, okay, there it goes. It looks okay. All right. Blessings. Blessings to all who are joining us, watching this video. This is Minister Scott with the Association of the Yahweh's Faith Once Delivered. This is where we talk and discuss about the worship of Yahweh, trying to get to the bottom of seeing what it really is. This is a kind of a journey because the Bible, the Christian Jewish Bible, mixes the worship of Yahweh with the worship of El and the worship of Baal and all of these things. So in these last videos that I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, I've basically been describing how it is that the nation of Israel came in contact with the name of Yahweh. I've been putting out some historic things and trying to get to the bottom of exactly who Yahweh or who Israel is and who were the original worshipers of Yahweh. So we talked about the patriarchs, that the patriarchs were originally not worshipers of Yahweh. They worshiped the Mesopotamian deity named El. We talked about Jacob and Israel not being the same person. They were originally two separate people. We talked about Joshua and Hosea being two separate people. We talked about the Exodus and how there were two of them. One is the Hyksos expulsion in 1550, and the other was a smaller Exodus with Moses, the Mosaic Exodus, in 1448 BC, 1446 BC. And so with all of this now, we talked about when it was that Moses and the Levites entered into the land of Canaan. And the reason why they didn't have an inheritance was because they came later than the rest of the tribes. So when you're looking in the Bible, when you're reading in the Bible, it seems as if Israel has been worshiping Yahweh since the days of the patriarch. Why? Because the name of Yahweh, the name of the Lord is throughout the Bible. So a lot of people get confused, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a lot of Christians and Jews, a lot of Messianics, very zealous people who are going to say the name of Yahweh is in the book of Genesis, and the name of Yahweh, so you're wrong. Sometimes you have to break the text apart to actually get the truth. And so what I want to discuss today is I want to bring us through the Israelite history. I want us to see in the Bible where Israel is worshiping other gods besides Yahweh. So the first thing, and let me tell you how I got this and how I'm getting everything. If you do a word search right now in any Bible app, Bible website, you can look up the name Baal. Okay, look up the name Baal. Look up the name Baal. So when you look up the name Baal, you have to skip the first 5 books of the Bible. It'll take you to Joshua. And Joshua 11, I'm just going to look at this from the Bible. I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way and just go through the Bible. Joshua chapter 11. Remember, I had originally said that Joshua came out of Israel, or came out of Egypt with the Hyksos, with the Habaru, and were a part of the the 10 tribes. So Joshua is known to be from the tribe of Ephraim, which is a Joseph tribe. Okay. So, of course, he's not coming out with the Levites, although that's what it seems like. He's coming out with the Hyksos. And so, Joshua chapter 11 and verse 17. You know what? What I'm going to do, let's look at the chapter. Oh, I wasn't even in the right chapter. What? Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. I'm not going to go through chapter 12 and 13. No, yeah. We can do 13. Chapter 13, verse 5. It says, not verse 5. Chapter 13, verse 17. So let me read 15 so you can have a little bit of context. Or let's go to 14. Only to the tribe of Levi he had given no inheritance. The sacrifices of Yahweh God of Israel made by fire are their inheritance, as he said to them. So again, they're very adamant in pointing out that Levi had no inheritance. Okay. Verse 15. And Moses had given to the tribe of the children of Reuben according to their families. Skip to verse 17. It's naming cities. These are the names of the cities. Heshbon, and all its cities that are in the plain. Dibon, Bamoth, Baal, Beth, Baal, Maon. You see how the cities have the name of Baal in them? Going from chapter 13 all the way to about chapter, I would say 18, you'll see that the tribes were given their inheritance, and some of the names are named after Baal. Okay. Remember, you could say, oh, that was the name of the city when they got there, because that was originally what I thought. But they also had a habit of renaming cities. So if they left it like that, then that tells you who they worship. Okay. So we can go into the book of Judges. Going to in the book of Judges, it's very clear. It's very clear that the people were not worshiping Yahweh; they were worshiping Baal. There's a specific verse that I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Judges chapter 3 and verse 5. It says, thus the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh. They forgot Yahweh their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. Therefore, the anger of Yahweh was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served the king of Mesopotamia 8 years. Okay, that's pretty obvious right there, right? So they forsook Yahweh. They didn't forsake Yahweh, they forsook El, and they served the Baals. What is happening here is a lot of times when people are looking up the history of Yahweh and the history of El, this is what they find. They find this part of history where the Israelites are worshiping multiple gods. What they don't go on to see is that these multiple gods, the reason why there were multiple gods were because there were multiple tribes from multiple or originating points. So of course you have the Hittites, who's a different nationality. You have the Amorites, who are a different tribe. You have the Perizzites, that are a different tribe. You have the Canaanites, who came from Mesopotamia. You have some Egyptian tribes, the Jebusites, the Hivites, all of these different tribes. We have to understand that these are different tribes. Each tribe, before this pantheon came into place, they all had one God that they worshiped. Okay. And what happened was, when they came into this place, they made peace with certain nations and they made war with other nations. Okay. And they were neutral with other nations. And so all of the gods of these nations were put together in a pantheon. And the same thing happened in Egypt. I think I've explained this before. In Egypt, Egypt is composed of differing tribes who made peace, who made an alliance of peace to form a nation. Okay. It's like the Native Americans in America. You have the Iroquois, and you have the Illinois, you have the Indiana. Those are Native American tribes. They formed confederacies. Okay. And this is why there's a state called Illinois, because the Native Americans in that vicinity had a confederacy. Okay. And they would probably consider Illinois, or Illinois was one of the main tribes in that area. Okay. So, um, historically speaking, Moses introduces to the people of Israel what's called Mosaic Yahwehism. So Moses is the one that presented them Yahwehism. The Yahwehism that he preserved had a minimal amount of laws. It wasn't very extensive. When the people of Israel get into, can you give me some water? When the people of Israel get into the land of Canaan, they begin to worship the other gods. And Yahweh, or not Yahweh, but their God was in the pantheon already. So, thank you so much. Appreciate it. So, their God was in the pantheon already. Now, scholars say that at this time, in the time of the judges, they were doing Mosaic Yahwehism. They're doing Israelite Yahwehism. And Israelite Yahwehism is the worship of Yahweh, is the polytheistic worship of Yahweh, meaning Yahweh is being worshipped, but he's also being worshipped side by side with other gods. Okay, this was the effect of the pantheon that they had. This pantheon, this Israelite religion, didn't come into play until the time of David, which we're going to talk about pretty soon here. During the time of the judges, though, they didn't know anything about Yahweh. They were worshiping El. They were supposed to be keeping their focus on El. They were supposed to be monotheistic, because before this point, they were monotheistic. The golden calf episode proves that, because the calf represents El, because he's represented as a bull. And so everything about the people of Israel coming out of Egypt says that they were worshiping El. But in this time, they got so caught up with the other nations making alliances that they were not wholly worshiping El. They were worshiping the other gods that were in the area, the gods of the Hittites, the gods of the Amorites, the gods of the Canaanites, and all of these things. Okay. Remember that Yahweh doesn't enter the scene until after or until right before Deborah and the victory over the king of Canaan. And even if you look at Deborah's song in Judges chapter 5, you will notice that she talks about certain tribes. In verse 14, she mentions Ephraim and Benjamin and Zebulun. In verse 15, she mentions Issachar. Verse 15, she also mentions Reuben. Verse 16, she mentions Reuben. Verse 17, she mentions Dan. 18 is Zebulun and Naphtali. So what tribes did she miss? Levi is not mentioned. Gad is not mentioned. Manasseh is not mentioned. That's 3 tribes that are missing. Out of 12, 13 rather. Out of 13 tribes. Asher is not mentioned. That's 4. Judah's not mentioned. That's 5. Simeon, 6. So the tribes are not mentioned altogether. And this is how we know that these tribes were not a unified nation at this point in time. They were all separate tribes. It was David that brought them together, or the kings that brought them together. So I want you to understand that the book of Judges is describing the worship of El. The book of Shemuel, El, means that he was a prophet or a judge of El. King Saul is he's also during this Baal worship time. King David, you would be surprised that King David did not worship Yahweh. King David worshipped El. How can you say that? David was a man after God's own heart. How can you say he wasn't worshiping Yahweh? We'll go to 2 Samuel chapter 5. I got a little itch in my throat, you guys. Dun dun dun, coronavirus. 2 Samuel chapter 5 and verse 20. And I'm saying this on video. Ooh, they're going to come for me, y'all. Don't try to vaccinate me. Okay, so 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 20, it says, So David went to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, what did he say? The Lord, or Yahweh, has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. Therefore, he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. Here's my question. If Yahweh helped him, why would he call the name of the place Baal Perazim? Now, what the redactor overlooked, what he really wanted to put the name of the place, but the name of the place is named after Baal, not named after Yahweh. Okay? So that's evidence that that David was the one who named that place. David was a Baal worshiper. Okay. It's also been heavily noted that the Psalms of David have heavy references to Baal, exactly like the cycle of Baal that they found in the Ugarit text. Okay, so David is a Baal worshiper. I was actually thinking about that for some time before I actually made the discovery, or not made the discovery, but before I got rid of my what do they call that when you don't want to accept something? Denial, yeah. But dissonance, something? Cognitive dissonance or something like that. Yeah, cognitive dissonance. I had that big time when it came with the Bible. Because I was reading information that said that was quoting David verbatim, and parallel to the Baal text next to each other. So the Baal text was next to the Psalm, and you can see that it sounded alike. David speaks a lot about Yahweh riding on the clouds. That's Baal language. Baal was a storm god. He rode on the clouds. So that type of language lets me know that David must have been a Baal worshiper. I would find it very difficult for someone in those times who were zealous to worship Yahweh to say, "Oh yeah, I like this text, in the Song of Baal. I'm going to use this, but I'm going to use it for Yahweh." They weren't like the people nowadays who take secular music and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to sing this in the church. We're going to sing this for the Lord." Back then, people were zealous for the God that they served. Hope I didn't offend you with that. So David worships Baal, and Solomon worships Baal. Okay, so David worships Baal, and of course, because David worshiped Baal, Solomon worshiped Baal. Now, at this time, in history, Yahweh has entered into what's called the Council of the Gods. Now, for this, I want to take you back to Deuteronomy. Let me look at a portion. Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 7. It reads like this: "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High, or El Elyon, divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. For the portion of Yahweh is his people. Jacob is the place of his inheritance." Okay? So, what does that verse say? What does it say? It says that El Elyon divided the inheritance among the gods. And El Elyon told the gods, "You have this nation," and Yahweh ended up with the nation of Israel. Okay? So, this was the belief at that time. El Elyon is the Most High in the time of David. Okay? And Yahweh is the son of El Elyon in this time. I have to reiterate because a lot of people may think, yeah, you're right. Yahweh was the son of El Elyon. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Yahweh came from a different place. And when the people in the land of Canaan found out about Yahweh, they put him in the pantheon under El because El was there first. So El is the father of the gods because he got there first. Okay? El was the earliest. The Canaanites came from Mesopotamia. So, in that region, though, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Midianites, all of these people had their own gods. Okay, and then later they combined them, and they were all subservient to El. Okay, so David worships Baal. Solomon worships Baal. Now, when it comes to Solomon, wait a minute. If Solomon worshipped Baal, then who did he build the temple to? The temple was built to Baal. As a matter of fact, the text explains it to you. Let's go to 1 Kings. Chapter 11. In verse 1. First Kings chapter 11 and verse 1. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nation of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you should not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart, for it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Hamash, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and from Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the author makes it seem like Solomon was being unfaithful to Yahweh, but he didn't worship Yahweh. He worshiped Baal. So he was unfaithful to Baal, and he served the other gods. Now, when we think of Solomon, we think the wisest man in the world. We think of him as the builder of the temple, which was one of the seven wonders of the world. That he was. He was wise. He was that. And he did build the temple. He built the temple, but he didn't build it for Yahweh. I always thought that he built the temple of Yahweh, and then he built across the street there was a temple to another god and all this. No, 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 no. Because in Ezekiel chapter 8, we see that those abominations were inside the temple. They were inside the temple. Okay. Now, this is important Because there is a legend in the Canaanite history that says El was the most high God. He was the king of the gods. And he gave up that title to Yam, who was the god of the sea. But Baal came along. Now we see where Baal comes from. Baal comes along and he fights Yam for the title of king of the gods. Okay? How is that? Why is that? The reason why is because David was a warrior. David started conquering territories. And because David was a Baal worshiper, the God of David, which was Baal, became the king of the gods in that region. Okay? So this is where that Canaanite legend comes from. When you see a legend like that, you should know that there were certain things that happened in history that promoted that God. When a God is promoted or a God is moved, it's saying that the nation that worshiped him was promoted or moved or got a better status or a lower status. Whenever you see some interaction among the gods, it's always because the nation that worshiped that God had some type of had some type of historical event that happened. And the historical event that exalted Baal was David, the conquest of David. Okay? David was a Baal worshiper. I have to reiterate that. David was a Baal worshiper. Okay? So at this time, the people of Israel are not worshiping Yahweh. But there's a phenomenon that you should probably know about. And this phenomenon, you can see it in the genealogies. When you look in the genealogies and you see names with El in it, that's how you know that the people were worshiping El at that time. When you won't see names with Baal in it. We'll explain why you won't see that in a minute. Well, in Chronicles you will, but I'll explain that in a minute. But when you see names with Yahweh in it that has the IAH at the end or Yeho at the beginning, then you know that the people or somebody, the father of that person whose name has Yah in it, started to worship Yah. So there's a phenomenon when you're looking in the genealogies, you'll see the change from El to Yahweh. You won't see the change from El to Baal or El to or Baal to Yahweh, but you will see the changes from El to Yahweh. And what happens in the middle, because there is a time gap, the names are still different. They don't have the name of a deity in them. Okay, so look at that. Okay, the reason I mention this is because even though the people are not worshiping Yahweh, there are people who are prophesying in the name of Yahweh. So there were people who were worshiping Yahweh at that time. If you go to 1 Kings chapter 11 still, and verse 29, it says, "Now it happened at that time that Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, met him on the way, and he had clothed himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. Then Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, 'Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to you.'" Okay, so what I want to point out is the person that's prophesying here, his name is Ahijah. So the name of Yah is in his name, meaning that either he is a prophet of Yahweh. Okay, he is a prophet of Yahweh. A prophet of Yahweh. Okay, so just so we understand, up until this point, this is during the time of Solomon. People of Israel are not worshiping Yahweh. The people of Israel are not worshiping Yahweh.
That would make sense why, David committed adultery.
Yeah, it would make sense why David committed adultery. Because there was no law against adultery at that time. The law against adultery came later. We're going to talk about that too. Go ahead. You had a question?
So why didn't they use Baal's name?
We're gonna get to that like in a couple of minutes, okay?
So they skipped Baal and went to Yahweh.
So that's only in the genealogies that they skip Baal. That's in the genealogies, and I'm going to explain why. There are a couple of names with Baal in them, but I'm going to explain it to you, okay? So Solomon is not worshiping Yahweh. And then there's a civil war. Jeroboam takes 10 tribes, and Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, the sons of David, supposedly they take 2 tribes. They take Benjamin and Judah, and they set up their nation in the south. Now, neither of these nations are worshiping Yahweh at this time. But Jeroboam was supposed to turn the nation over to Yahweh, to the worship of Yahweh. He did not, and the reason he did not was because he was afraid that if he turned the nation over to the worship of Yahweh, that they would go back to Judah. They would go back to the sons of David. Why would he think that? Because the worship of Yahweh may have been an enemy god at the. Oh yeah, that makes sense. So Baal and Yahweh were stern enemies. They were very strong enemies. Okay, in every way. You'll see that that the enmity between Baal and Yahweh in Israel comes to a head during the time of Jezebel. Okay. So, but Jeroboam was afraid that if he said that they will worship Yahweh, then everybody would desert him and go back to Baal worship in Judah. Okay. So he decided to stay where they were and to continue worshiping. I'm not sure if it was Baal or El. Most of the centers for the northern tribes were formerly El worshiping places. Okay, so let me go back to Jeroboam. First Kings chapter 12. In verse 25. First Kings chapter 12 and verse 25. It says, then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. So Shechem, a place where El was worshipped. Also, he went out from there and built Penuel. Where's Penuel? They're worshiping El too. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David if these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem. Now we all know that it wasn't the house of Yahweh, it's the house of Baal. So we're just going to replace it. And if these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Baal at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore, the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Who brought Israel out of the land of Egypt? El brought Israel out of the land of Egypt, according to their sources. Okay, so Jeroboam brings the people back to El worship. Okay, verse 29, and he set up one in Bethel and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines in the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not the sons of Levi. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. Okay? So Jeroboam brings the people back to El worship. Okay? He brings them back to El worship. So, meanwhile, the sons of David are worshiping Baal in the south. Okay? So all of these centers that are mentioned used to be El, where they worshipped El. So now the kingdom is divided and they're worshiping 2 different gods. Here's something I would like to point out, because this really caught me by surprise. We'll go to Second Chronicles? Yeah, Second Chronicles. We'll go to Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles chapter 13 and verse 1. It says, in the 18th year, you got it? Second Chronicles chapter 13 and verse 1. You got it? Okay. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, Abijah became king over Judah. So this made me think, Abijah, does that mean that Rehoboam turned to Yahweh? It kind of threw me off a little bit, because his name has Yah at the end of it. Well, there's something you got to know about the book of Chronicles. The book of Chronicles was not written, but compiled by the person who wrote the book of Ezra. It's Ezra. And we're going to talk about Ezra later too. He's kind of an important figure in Judaism. But he compiled the book of the Chronicles, and he had an agenda when he compiled the book. The genealogies he could not have known. These genealogies are going back from the time of David, but he lived after the during and after the Babylonian exile. There's no way he could have, come up with the genealogy like he did. he got them from other places. And when you're reading the book, you will understand he does reference the books where he gets his information from. Okay? So he says that the king after Rehoboam was named as Abijah. But if you go back to 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 1, it says, in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam became king over Judah. Now, this thing about Abijah and Abijam, Abijah means Yahweh is father. Okay? Is my father. Abijam means Yam, who is the God of the sea, is my father. Okay? So Abijam makes sense. It's historical. Remember, the book of Kings is an earlier source than the book of Chronicles. The book of Kings is referenced in the book of Chronicles. But you'll also see that there are cross references in Kings because, of course, it was Ezra. He didn't just compile the book that he made. He also compiled the scripture. He put the stories together. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so Abijam. So they're still not worshiping Yahweh at that time. But something happens when we skip down to verse 9. So 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 9, it says, thank you. It says, in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa became king over Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His grandmother's name was Maacah, the granddaughter of Abishalom. Skip down to verse 12. And he banished the perverted persons from the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. Wait a minute. You see that, right? Asa started to remove the idols that his father made. Who made the idols? Rehoboam made the idols. Solomon made the idols. David made the idols. Okay? So he removed them. He also, in verse 13, it says, also he removed Maacah, his grandmother, from being queen mother because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. And Asa cut down her obscene image and burned it by the brook of Kidron. Okay, so here we want to open it.
No, thank you. Not right now.
So if we go to 2 Chronicles, remember that Ezra gets his sources from earlier books. So if we go to 2 Chronicles chapter 14, it says, starting at verse 1, so Abijah rested with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. Then Asa his son reigned in his place. In his days the land was quiet for 10 years. Asa did what was right, good and right in the eyes of Yahweh, for he removed the altars of the foreign gods and the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the wooden images. Verse 4, very important verse. He commanded Judah to seek Yahweh and to observe the law and the commandments. Okay, so Asa is the first king of Judah to command the people to worship Yahweh. Okay? King Asa is the first one to command the people to worship Yahweh. So I want to go back to 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 14. It says, but the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was loyal to Yahweh all his days. Okay? So Asa is the first king to introduce the worship of Yahweh to the people of Israel. Now, or to the people of Judah, not Israel, Judah. Okay? So now we know that Asa worshiped Yahweh. How do we know? Because the next king was his son. His son's name was Jehoshaphat. Has the name of Yahweh right at the beginning. Jehoshaphat. Okay? Jehoshaphat, we're not going to really speak much about him. We are going to speak about him. Let's go, Jehoshaphat. All right. So in the time of Asa, there was a man that rose up by the name of Omri. Omri ends up becoming the king of the northern tribes, and Omri has a son named Ahab. Ahab marries a woman named Jezebel. Now Jezebel brings her Baal worship from Sidonia. Is it Sidonia? Yeah, Sidonia and Phoenicia. Okay, so Jehoshaphat marries Jezebel's daughter. Okay, now Jehoshaphat he's a semi-righteous person. We'll just say it like that. Semi-righteous person. He doesn't do any evil, but he's constantly finding himself having to go and help the Israelites. He doesn't want to. You can't see that in the text, but I can imagine. Well, actually, he does want to. And it's the prophets who are in the north who are telling him, why are you helping them? These people don't serve Yahweh. So the prophets of Yahweh are in the north. They are being persecuted by Jezebel. Okay? Elijah is in the north. All of these people are in the north. They're being persecuted by Jezebel. And in the south, they are freely worshiping Yahweh. Okay? So, the worship of the God that Jezebel brings to the northern tribes was the Baal that opposed Yahweh. Okay? Yahweh is starting to rise up. This is the first time that Yahweh is on the national scene. This is the first time that a king has proclaimed that Yahweh should be worshipped. Now, the people in the north are opposed to the people in the south. The people in the south are worshiping Yahweh. The people in the north are worshiping Baal. So Baal has a big enmity against Yahweh. It's not until when Jehu kills all of the worshipers of Baal, they do something after that. they change all the names of anybody who's ever written whose name has the name Baal in it. So I'm going to give you an example in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. Give me a minute, y'all. Because I want to make sure I have both of them ready. Chronicles. First Chronicles. Okay. So, 1 Samuel. I want to talk about the death of Eli. Sorry, wrong one. Okay. 9:39. Ishbosheth. So second Samuel. That's why I couldn't find it. 2 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 8. 2 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 8. Okay. It says, but Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. Okay. So the son of Saul is Ishbosheth. But if we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 9, 1 Chronicles chapter 9 and verse 39. I'm sorry, verse 33. Yes, verse 33. It says, Ner begot Kish, Kish begot Saul, and Saul begot Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. So, in 2 Samuel, his name is Eshbosheth. In 1 Chronicles chapter 9, it's Eshbaal. So what happened was when Jezebel was finally killed and all her family were killed, they considered the name of Baal to be a shame. So anybody who had the name Baal at the end or beginning of their name, they changed Baal to Boshet. Boshet means shame. Okay, so instead of Ishbaal, it's Ishboshet. Instead of Mephibosheth, it's Mephibosheth. So we don't know about Mephibosheth. We know him by Mephibosheth. If you don't know who Mephibosheth is the son of Jonathan, David's best friend. So this is how you know that they were worshiping Baal. Whenever you see Boshet or Beshet at the end of a name, that means originally that name had Baal in it, okay? And it was changed later on. But First Chronicles is an early source. It's not a later source. So I'm going to go on and explain that the next significant king is King Hezekiah. During Hezekiah's time, the king of Assyria came against the northern tribes, and they took the tribes away. When that happened, the prophets in the north came down to the south, and they were already preaching, you should not be worshiping all these different gods. You should be worshiping Yahweh alone. So it's considered the Yahweh alone movement. Okay. So Hezekiah, what does Hezekiah do? He has the temple cleaned and all the images that were inside of it thrown out and burned. And then he dedicates the temple to Yahweh. So all of, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will be attentive to their prayer, and I will heal their land. That whole episode where Yahweh is speaking to Solomon, and that prayer that Solomon made was not made by Solomon. It was made by Hezekiah. Okay, that whole episode was Hezekiah who made the prayer and who got the response from Yahweh. Okay, so Hezekiah dedicates the temple to Yahweh, and then he invites all of the tribes that were scattered. He invites them to keep the Passover, okay, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, there's something interesting about this Feast of Unleavened Bread. Let's go back to Second King, to Second Kings or First Kings. I think it's Second Kings. Got to go back to Second Kings, y'all. Second Kings. And we're going to go to Hezekiah. Is it in Second Kings or is it only in Chronicles? Yeah, it's only in the second. Well, there's a slight verse. I'm trying to figure out where that verse is. Here we go. Handy dandy search. Passover. We're going to go into Kings. Where is it in Kings? But it can't be 21. Or it can't be 23. Okay, so it's in Chronicles. Okay, so Second Chronicles chapter 30. And I like to switch back and forth between Chronicles and Kings because Chronicles has more details. Second Chronicles chapter 30. There we go. Second Chronicles chapter 30, verse 1. It says, and Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, and that they should come to the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem to keep the Passover to Yahweh. For the king and his leaders and all the assembly in Jerusalem had agreed to keep the Passover in the second month. That's interesting. They agreed to keep the Passover in the second month. Why in the second month and not the first? Well, you might say, oh, because he cleaned the temple in the first month. Well, there is evidence that the Levites may have been keeping the Passover originally in the second month instead of in the first month. Okay. So there is a selection in Numbers chapter 9, and they try to put it in there as, oh yeah, this is an alternative. But there was a group that was keeping the Passover in the first month and a group that was keeping the Passover in the second month. Hezekiah kept it in the second month. Okay. In the book of Chronicles, it says that Josiah kept it in the first month. But in Second Kings, it says that he kept it in the prescribed manner. So it doesn't give a time. Hey, okay. So Hezekiah dedicates the temple to Yahweh, keeps the Passover in the second month, and he also puts the Levites in. Now, what you have to understand about this Yahwehism that's being set up in Judah now is that it's going to involve sacrifices. It's going to involve sacrifices. Okay. Where did this Yahweh alone movement come from? They came from the north. Okay. Who were they originally worshiping in the north? They were originally worshiping El before Baal got there. So the prophets of the Yahweh alone movement that come from the north are perpetuating a Yahwehism that uses the sacrifices of El and the worship of Yahweh. Okay, so the book of Deuteronomy was written after this time. Some of the reforms that are in Deuteronomy were made by Jehoshaphat. Some of them, none of the ones that are in the book of Deuteronomy as we know it, came from Hezekiah, but Josiah had a big hand in putting some of the laws in the book of Deuteronomy also. So the book of Deuteronomy was not finished until after Josiah. Okay. So this is where the book of Deuteronomy comes from, and this becomes the law. Let me think. Trying to think what else happened around this time. So again, the people are going back and forth between Yahweh worship and the worship of the other gods, but Yahweh doesn't seem to prevail. Yahweh doesn't win. The worship of Yahweh doesn't win, but because the worship of Yahweh was confined to the upper classes. So of course the Levites, and then the priests, and then to the kings. Okay, so this is the history of the worship of Yahweh. And it's pretty evident when you're reading the scriptures that there were kings that did not obey Yahweh. So for Israel to be the synonymous for the worship of Yahweh is completely erroneous, completely inaccurate historically. Okay? So they were always going between gods. They were worshiping certain deities, and Yahweh, every once in a while, they will pull him out. Okay? So, the Deuteronomy tradition combines Yahweh and El, and then some time passes, and then they begin to write the book of Deuteronomy. So, when the book of Deuteronomy is written, most of the history that's in the Bible was rewritten by the redactors of the Deuteronomy movement. So the book of Samuel, all the books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, what comes after Samuel? Kings, all of those were changed. These histories were written during the time of the Deuteronomy prophets, and they were rewritten to so that the people in their generation would believe that Yahweh has always been worshipped by their ancestors. Okay, so you don't see the worship, you don't see them putting emphasis on gods, you don't see the names of other gods in the Bible, except for when they're talking about, oh, the people had a big period of time where they didn't serve Yahweh. Okay, they make that very small. They don't go into description about it. Okay, so they rewrite the history so that it looks like from Joshua all the way to the end of the Bible, that Yahweh was always worshipped. Yahweh is the God of Israel. They block out the Kenites. We don't want those people to be in the Bible. Otherwise, they're going to know that Yahweh is not the God of Israel. They're going to know that the Kenites are the original worshipers of Yahweh, and that Yahweh was worshipped in Midian and in Edom before Israel came in contact with the worship of Yahweh. So we can't put them in there. We're gonna, if they're relevant to the story, okay, but they're not really relevant. We're not going to tell the story. This is why when you get into Exodus chapter 2, the name, you don't see the name Kenite anywhere in that vicinity. In Exodus, you don't see the Kenites there at all. The father-in-law of Moses is a Midianite. Okay, and most of the Torah, he's not a Kenite. A Kenite, he's a Midianite. Okay, so this is to help you guys understand what is the actual history of the Bible, and to let you know that it's actually written in the Bible. You will be surprised at the things that you will find in there if you read it carefully. So that's our segment for today. If you have any questions, let me know. See ya.